That's called thinking. Was it a little strange? Are you used to that kind of thing? Are you used to keyboards typing and sprints and fast-paced things just happening, right? If the keyboard ain't making a noise, then you can't be coding, right? People sitting and thinking used to be important, and we've kind of lost it. We've lost our way a little bit, I think, because we're too concerned with the productivity aspect and not looking at what that causes. Productivity is a word that's meant to be positive now and positive later. Otherwise, if productivity is positive now and has a negative later, then something's wrong. It could be something along the lines of the analogy of technical debt, perhaps, right? But thinking is kind of something that is a little bit missing. When I've looked into various teams and I'm looking at people, I see them doing. It's great. And if they're not doing, they're in a meeting talking at each other. What about this? What about that? Yeah, fine. Maybe that's a form of thinking. But really, thought is quiet time. And if silence bothers you, if you can't be quiet and think about something, then it might be very, very difficult for you to do something in a positive way without just hitting your head against something, trying again, hitting your head against something. Now, really, the topic of this is design. But my first point was really to think more and to sort of demonstrate to you a little bit, I don't know if that worked, but to show you that thinking is important and it kind of feels out of place. And yes, I get it, I'm on a video, so I shouldn't be doing nothing. You're expecting me to communicate with you, but I hope you got the point that silence is something that we should appreciate in quite a number of roles in our industry, and we're kind of learning to cover it over. The second point about design is that we've put people in boxes. We're creating roles like UI design and user experience design and database design and architect and component architect, or, we've got these boxes where people are designing things and understanding their role in the horizontal layers of a system. And I'm all for horizontal layers in an architectural sense. We try and make things cohesive on each layer. We try, okay, you can have open and closed layers. We try and keep them closed. We want our layers to provide us with a level of decoupling, and I'm all for that. But we often neglect the vertical slice, right? So if you design something in the UI that is supposed to be a component, something that you can reuse, and it doesn't have the correct underpinnings, it doesn't have code that is behaving in that way, the code is a little bit more tightly coupled to other parts, well, then you can't pull it apart. And as you go down these horizontal layers, you go further down into them, you find that it might be coupled there. Now, if we're not decoupling all the way through, vertical design all the way through, then there was no point. You've lost the time that you thought about the UI and all of that decoupling. You've lost the benefit because in the layers below, it wasn't even considered. So to me, vertical design is a concept that I talk about. I don't think I've heard it anywhere. I don't know. It might be. You can write a comment below and tell me who's thought of this. But to me, vertical design is making decoupling and some kind of cohesion, consistency across the layers on a slither vertically, so that you can pull it apart and reuse it somewhere else. The third point would be the roles. We really need to look at how the roles interact with each other. Is it good enough for somebody to go away and think by themselves and come back and present, and then we look at it from a superficial point of view, yes, that looks great? Or they go away and design a database without any consideration to UI, without any consideration to objects that we might be creating in some domain language or domain graph just of the domain. But there's no thought into that. I mean, is there conflict? If somebody designs test-driven and designs a suite of things, is that what we're going to carry through to the UI? Is that going to influence the database? Probably because we all influence each other, but if we're all isolated in our roles and there isn't a vertical view on it, we get inconsistencies, and at worst, we get things that just make it impossible to pull apart. User interface design has elements that, I as an architect don't really fully appreciate, right? So I'm not in that particular domain, so a lot of things will go amiss for me. But I do understand decoupling, and I do understand cohesion, and I do understand how things should flow and how things should be decoupled. And if I see that in the UI, that it's, not being done or that it is being done, I can identify that. And if I'm looking at a database and I'm looking at, some kind of relational design, some kind of fourth form, remember the old DB admins? They used to do the design first and present it to you, and then you just have to read, whatever the structure is, you just have to read it. And of course, existing systems, legacy systems, or that older mentality is still, pervasive. So it's around, and people are designing things based on databases. Well, databases, especially relational databases, aren't very good at scale. So you're already restricting yourself in a certain conditions, or at least you have constraints within that layer. But if we think vertically, well, then we're thinking in a slice of the system to give behavior and functionality to a part of the system that can be pulled away from the core. And if you just think horizontal, you're not going to achieve this. So to create fully modular, scalable systems, decoupled, we need less dependencies. We need high cohesion, decoupling as high as possible. We need to think vertically about design. We need to cross-fertilize domain roles, and we need to have somebody in charge of the vertical slice so that we can create and provide that consistency. But I'll leave you with this. Who on your team is looking at the design from UI all the way through to the database?